The Indo-European Household by William Edward Hearn is a book that examines the customs, institutions, religious rites, and social structure of the ancient Aryans. In it, Hearn details many facets of Aryan life, such as how households were organized, the roles and duties of its members, and the structure of Indo-European clans. Before diving into the contents of the book, it is worth mentioning that the book was originally published in 1878 under the title, The Aryan Household, Its Structure and Development. Imperium Press informs us that the decision to change its title is attributable to the fact that the word Aryan is politically charged, and in order to reach a broader audience, the synonym Indo-European was substituted. I do not agree with this decision. The name of our race should not be an unspeakable word, nor should the title of Hearn's 1878 book be anything other than that which he called it. For these reasons, hereafter in the video I will refer to the book as The Aryan Household. Proceeding now to the content of the book, it is necessary for us to understand some of the ways in which archaic Aryan life differed from our modern lifestyles. Unlike modern liberal societies, millennia ago on the steppes of Eurasia, our ancestors saw the world through a much more religious and group-oriented lens. The notions of individualism and irreligiosity would have been alien to our ancestors. Furthermore, they would have at all times believed the natural order to be governed not by scientific processes, but instead by anthropomorphic gods. Here we must draw a distinction between two kinds of deities, both of which were worshipped. Natural gods were beings akin to Zeus or Poseidon, and ruled over things like the sea, storms, and the sky. They were the more powerful of the two classes, and were worshipped regularly by the village as a community. They were, however, not the most important gods in the hearts of the ancient Aryans. This distinction belongs to the domestic gods, which were the spirits of deceased members of a particular family. Each household had its own domestic gods, and unlike the natural gods, worship of these ancestor spirits were confined to their particular families. Writing on ancestral hearth religion, Hearn informs us, of this tutelary spirit, or company of spirits, the hearth was the altar. There the holy fire ever burned, and there the gross corporeal substance of the food was purged away, and its spiritual essence was rendered fit for the acceptance of the spirit. On this hearth, where, in his lifetime, he had himself so often sacrificed, the departed house father received at the hands of his successor his share of every meal, and heard from his lips, in his own honor, those familiar words of prayer and praise that were the heirlooms of his race. Every meal was in effect a sacrifice, and the Aryan house father, when he reverently asked a blessing upon his humble board, felt that he was not only seeking a continuance of the divine protection, but that he was securing the happiness of those who were literally his fathers and his gods. This quote highlights several facets of Aryan hearth religion of which we should take notice. These are the holy hearth fire, the significance of meals in matters of religion, and the importance of the house father. The holy hearth fire was a flame which was the duty of the house father to keep eternally lit. It not only attracted the attention of ancestor spirits, but also symbolized them. When sacrifices were offered to the ancestor spirits, the holy flame rendered daily offerings of food appropriate for the spirit to consume. Indeed, the significance of meals in religious ritual cannot be overstated. Hearn informs us that in both public rituals worshipping the natural gods and private rituals worshipping the ancestor spirits, a communal meal was shared. The celebrant of this ritual would first offer a portion to the deities along with prayers, and then the participants would partake in the meal. The shared meal was not merely symbolic in the eyes of the ancient Aryans. It was quite literally their way of nourishing the ancestor spirits. To quote Hearn, men thought that the disembodied spirit retained similar feelings and similar needs to those that he had in flesh. It was thus equally a duty and a pleasure to share with him the customary meal, and to pay to him the wonted respect. But there was something more than this. The common meal was the sole means by which a communication could be maintained between the spirit world and the earth. The spirits were not perceptible to human senses, but the offering of food and of drink formed a sort of middle term by which the spiritual and the earthly could be brought together. Every object, whether animate or inanimate, was supposed to consist of two parts, of a substance and of a shadow, of a soul and of a body, of something immaterial as well as something material. It was upon the immaterial part of the offerings that the spirits fed, while the earthly parts were left for men. Thus, both the spirit and the worshipper lived on the same nourishment. Now that we understand the ancient Aryans' natural and domestic gods, the significance of the hearth flame, and the importance of a meal in archaic worship, we ought now discuss the structure of an Aryan household. Hearn informs us that the archaic Aryan conception of the household is very different from our modern conception of a household. As Hearn writes of the archaic household, it formed an organized, permanent body, distinct from its individual members, owning property and having other rights and duties of its own. In it, all its members, whatever might be their possession, had interests according to their rank. Over it, the house father presided with absolute power. With his discretion, no external authority was competent to interfere, and the interest of the corporate body, not that of any individual member, was the sole object of regard. Furthermore, speaking on the household structure, Hearn also writes, "On its visible and external part, the house father stands conspicuous and supreme. His authority, however, is exercised under constant sense of his responsibility to his house spirits, and is checked and regulated thereby. By his side stands the house mother, the functionary charged with the care of the holy hearth, the natural head, subject to her husband's command of the internal economy of the family, and, above all, the mother of the house father-to-be. Then follow the sons, the hopes of the house, and after them, but on a lower footing, the daughters. If nature have denied the gift of sons, expedients may be adopted to supply the want, and the adopted, or otherwise recognized, son is accepted as fully as though he were natural born. In the lowest place stand the slaves, and those outsiders who, while they more or less depend upon the household, were not full members of it, but are associated with it for some particular purpose or some temporary object." These quotes provide a good sketch of what the Aryan household is like. The house father rules like a king, and his decision is final. Everyone in the household is under his hand and obliged to follow his judgment. His duties include presiding over rituals dedicated to the household's domestic gods, arbitrating disputes between household members, and making decisions on behalf of the family. He was considered master over his domain, and no one in the community, not even the clan chief, was fit to intrude upon his household and dictate to him how to preside over his family or rituals. In the earliest times, there was no concept of laws or estate, only of customs and the clan. As such, the checks on the house father's power came from religion. He was obliged to obey the religious precepts of his clan, and disobeying them gravely imperiled his soul. The Aryans were a very superstitious people, and fully believed in the wrath of gods and ancestor spirits, and as such, this was deterrent enough to stop house fathers from behaving tyrannically in a time before its centralized states. The other members of the household each had their own duties and varying levels of prestige. An important aspect to point out is that blood was not the only glue that held the household together, but rather it was the worship of the house's domestic gods. This meant that if a boy was adopted into a family which only had daughters, he was considered the heir to the house father. He simply needed first the approval of the house father to be adopted, then needed to be ritualistically initiated into the household cult. He would then become the heir, or the next in line to become house father, although he shared no bloodline with the ancestor spirits. By the same token, daughters and younger sons who marry and set off when they come of age are no longer part of the household, even though they are by blood related to the family of the house father. Instead, the daughters are welcomed into the household of their husbands and become house mothers. In the case of younger sons, while their eldest brother takes the mantle of house father and presides over the traditional family hearth, they set off and form their own new households, of which they will become house fathers in their own right. They may still worship their ancestors, but will do so in a new hearth. The original family hearth will be inherited by the eldest brother. Regarding marriage, it was of the utmost necessity for a marriage to produce offspring, so that there would be someone to attend to the ancestor spirits. Thus, one of the only acceptable reasons for a divorce was if the wife could not give the house father children. Furthermore, there existed limitations on who a young Aryan was allowed to take as his wife. As Hearn writes, 2 fundamental rules, one positive and the other negative, regulated the bridegroom's choice. He must marry a daughter of his own people, and he must not marry a woman of his own kin. The race on one side and his own name on the other side marked the limits of his selection. Through these rules, Aryan society prohibited both miscegenation and incest, which are abominations. Moreover, as a consequence of marriage being for producing children to perpetuate the family, homosexuality was also prohibited. With an understanding of how the Aryan household functioned, we may now turn our attention to the clan. The clan was the precursor to the state in Aryan societies and was a collection of related households. It was led by a chieftain, who was the eldest male of the branch most closely related to the clan's eponym, or founder. Within the clan, multiple types of families existed. Natural families were smaller households akin to what we have already discussed. However, also present within some clans were joint family households, or households in which extended family members did not move out and instead lived under one roof under the authority of the house father. Hearn notes that there is debate as to whether clans emerge out of several closely related natural families coming together, or whether they come about by joint families reaching too many members and then spreading out. Whatever the case, the thing we can say for certain is that the clans did emerge and consisted of related units of families. Regarding the structure of these clans, as we have previously mentioned, clans were governed by a chief. It is appropriate to conceptualize the chief as being to the clan what the house father is to the household. Below the chief were nobles, or house fathers who were closely related to the original line of descent of the eponym. Together, these men formed a natural aristocracy who assisted the chief and made up his council. Below them were freedmen, who enjoyed considerably less privileges, being former slaves themselves. They could never become nobility, however, were allowed more rights than the lowest class, which were slaves. Here, the distinction between classes rested exclusively on blood, with no mobility for the lower classes. Still, even the slave class was afforded protection from outsiders and provided sustenance by their masters and authority figures within the clan. For members of the lower classes, upward mobility was cut off to them, but there was a way to earn respect outside of the clan structure. This was through the komitatus, or as it was known by the Germans, the Mannerbund. The komitatus was a collection of warriors united in service to a lord. This lord was different from the chieftain in that he did not need noble blood. Any man could become one if he was able to attract a band of followers. The character of the komitatus was unmistakably martial, and as both William Edward Hearn and Edward Maxwell tell us, unsuited for existence in towns or cities. As such, the place of the komitatus was not in villages, laboring on farms, but rather on the battlefield. By joining a komitatus, a lower-class freeman or freedman could find more respect and freedom than he could inside a clan village, provided his lord allowed him to join. The two final topics to note are intertwined. These are the ancient Aryan views on race, and what we can glean from the book to benefit our people in modern times. We have already seen when we discussed rules surrounding marriage that archaic Aryans disallowed miscegenation in addition to incest and homosexuality. Today in modern liberal societies, subversive types often claim that race is a social construct which emerged recently in human history. This, of course, is not true. Furthermore, it is also the case that our ancestors knew of the biological fact of race. As Hearn writes on page 19, nothing was further from the minds of archaic men than the notion that all men were of one blood and were creatures of an All-Father in heaven. The universal belief of the early world was that men were of different bloods, and that they each had fathers of their own, and that these fathers were not in heaven but beneath the earth. Far too often today, liberals deny the existence of race as a biological fact. By a similar token, Christians claim that we are all one race, the human race, under Jesus Christ. Neither the liberal nor the Christian are correct when they speak of race. This is where we come to the question of what the Aryan Household, as a book, has to offer our people today. I contend that we can benefit greatly from looking back to our pagan ancestors in a time before both liberalism and Christianity. To quote Edward Maxwell in his excellent foreword to the book, "Tribalism is hated by the state because it provides a means outside of the state by which a people recognizes itself as a people. Given that the native populations of the West will soon live as minorities in their own lands, Tribalism is inevitable in the West, and the Indo-European household provides a model for effective organization. The eponymous founder gives rise to a patrilineal line within some generally recognized boundary. In conclusion, therefore, the Aryan household is necessary reading for any men and women who wish for European peoples not to go extinct. The actions of odious individuals such as Winston Churchill, FDR, and Lyndon B. Johnson have in recent times created a horrific situation for the sons and daughters of Europe and America. But by remembering ancient wisdom and connecting with our authentic folkways in a time before liberalism and the weak, universalist religion of Christianity, we may better prepare ourselves for the coming times ahead, and pass down great knowledge and a thriving tradition, authentic to our people, to our children.